Hello, welcome to SPED 5040 with intervention practices with infants, toddlers, and families. And today we're going to be talking about service delivery options. And this is Module 5, of course. And within this, we're going to talk about where do we see kids that have disabilities that age birth through 3. And there's a wide variety of options, and there's pros and cons to different options. And so we're going to try to look at those and try to talk about and tease out some of the good things and the bad things about the different delivery options. Okay. Now, there are often two options, okay, in birth to 2. And there is center-based options and there's community or home-based options, okay? And community home-based options has different connotations, okay? So it could be in the home, it could be various other places, but I guess it should be center-based and non-center-based, right? So as you see, if you're from Chattanooga, you'll see that Siskins Children's Institute. It is one of the best in Tennessee. Actually, it's nationally renowned for some of the things that it's doing there. And so it is a center-based option, and of course you see a house that's a home-based options. There is evidence or lack of evidence to back up these various choices, and we're going to look at them like I said earlier. So with center-based options, there are different types of center-based, okay? One is full-day child only. Okay, so the child attends by themselves and it's full day, just like a daycare would be. The second one is part day child only, okay, and that's they attend part of the day. And then there is child and family or parents. So there's another option where the child and the family and parents attend, okay? And then there's also medical daycare, and we're going to look and talk about all of these options, okay? Now, a full day center-based child only option, it is an older model, okay, and we are seeing less of this model. When I first started in early intervention, and I won't tell you exactly when that was, when I first started in there, we did have more center-based. And so this is where the family comes and then bring the child to the center. It's just like a regular daycare kind of thing. But we've gone more home-based, and I want you to think about why we might have gone more home-based. Why have we stopped more of the centers, okay? There are some centers that are still disability specific that are out there, okay? And one, of course, is autism. There is a theory of thought that kids with autism need to be educated in such a way that they are taken out of being with typical peers or in typical daycares. They learn the skills, and then as they learn certain skills such as matching and sorting and imitation, then they start to go back in with the typical kids. And then you have vision and hearing impairments, and sometimes they have their centers because they're so specific on what they're training their children to do. Okay, like with vision impairment, of course, they're training mobility, right, walking around. And so they may have certain techniques set up. And then with hearing impaired, of course, a lot of sign language and that kind of thing. So there are some of that. Now, it's like a regular daycare that typical kids can go to, like I said, with center-based. It can be inclusive where we have regular children with that center. We don't see that as often. Now, you could say that you might see that in early Head Start, but that's really community-based, and I'll tell you more about that here in a minute. It can be included with center-based where we have inclusive children of all kinds of ability level, but more often than not, it's self-contained with only children with disabilities. Okay, and who's engaged? Well, what's going on is the child is engaged during the day. It is just, like I said, like going to daycare, right? And they are going to be playing and they're going to be doing various things. And while they're doing whatever it is they're doing within the center, the people that work at the center are going to be working with that child to gain skills that they need. Okay, the parent might be engaged, but they often aren't, or they often don't engage them in things like support groups, parenting classes, etc. Okay, so you might see that there might be a little bit of that in that we have a support meeting once a month, that kind of thing. But often it is just pretty much the child that is engaged in this type of center. Okay. Full day child only research shows, okay, that it is good for parents who have to work. And you can understand this. If you have a child with a disability and you have to work, if the child has a really significant disability, you might have a really hard time getting typical daycares to take care of your child. Okay. So this is something that is going to be helpful because it lets the parent work. Okay. We also see that it is good with mild disabilities, low socioeconomic status, so children who have that are in the lower socioeconomic status in the United States, and then children with behavior issues often do really well with full-day child-only centers. Okay, and so these are often kids that need some intense kind of help with the behavior. But it's interesting to me that you see mild disabilities there. They say that it's not so good for more significant disabilities. Okay, and you got to think, why would that be the case? And part of that might be because children with more significant disabilities do better when they're taught in the environment in which they're going to be. And so that center, the child may do well at the center, but then they go back to their home and they're not doing as well, right? They're not walking as much, they're not doing as well. So you can see why a child with more significant disabilities may not benefit as much from full-day child-only centers. Okay, so I've got some videos here. They're listed, and what I'm going to do is I am going to set the links up in the class, and you'll be able to see them. I want you to go to them and kind of see what Siskinds looks like, okay, and see what a full-day center for a child with autism looks like. Okay, it's really interesting to see these. Now, the next one is part-day child only. Now, this works like full day. Okay, and it could be that parents don't want a full day. Okay, it might be that they don't work. It might be that they don't want their child in the center all day long. Okay, and that might be why they have part-day child only. Also, it could be that some systems they can't afford to do that. Say you're a more poor school system in East Tennessee, and you have 30 children to work with that have a disability, but you don't have really the money to deal with and pay for all 30 kids at the same time. You could split them into two groups and have 15 children there one day and 15 children there another, or you could have it where 15 children there in the morning and then there's another 15 in the afternoon. There's various ways that you split up part day, and so they offer this because they can offer services to more children. It just isn't full day. Okay, now children in this type of program either go home after they are at the center or they go to regular daycare setting, and you will often see them transition from their center where they're working on their special ed, if you will, activities to a regular daycare setting. Okay, now here is some of part-day child only and what the research says about that. Okay, one good thing is it's longer than a 1-hour home visit. Typically when we do home-based early intervention and we go into the homes to see families, that visit only lasts an hour. And a center that is part day is going to be longer than that, and that's really nice. It also gives the parents and caregiver a respite. And by this we mean it gives them a break. It can be very, very taxing to have a regular child. Trust me, I know, having a 2- and 4-year-old. When they were babies, it was really, really hard sometimes to get anything done, and you are always with the child. This gives them a little break, okay, and that's kind of good. And it's good for children that can't attend full day due to health issues. So if the child, say, has seizures or is very medically fragile and they can't be at a center all day long, this gives them an option of being at a center, just not all day. So that's a good thing. Now, the thing that is a con is that it may not impact development as much as a more intensive program might, meaning that full day would probably be better than part day, more impact, okay? And the child does not specifically learn how to interact with the toys in their environment. This is kind of what I was saying whenever we were talking about full day before, where it's not as good for kids with more significant disabilities. They're not interacting with the toys in their own environment. They're not manipulating how to get around in their own house, but they do so well at the center, but it doesn't always transfer, okay? So that's a con to this. And also, parents who work, this can be a very, very difficult model to use, because if they're having to take the child to another daycare setting or to a nanny or a grandparent that's going to watch them, then you have to get childcare, you have to set up the transportation, it's all those kind of things. So it can be a real con with that as well. Now, part day child and family caregiver. With this one, it often includes activities for siblings to be either peers or alternate activities for the peers. And so what that means is they kind of create an inclusive environment, because if the child has siblings, they invite them to come along and they are the peer. Okay, which can be good or bad, because my children, sometimes they do well together and they play really nicely together, and other times it is a kind of a problem. So you can see how it's going to enhance the lives and skills of the family as a whole. While the kids are doing that, the parents may be working on, say, reading, okay? Or if mom has a younger child, she may be working on, say, breastfeeding. Maybe it's a breastfeeding support group, or it could be a family literacy group. Say the family doesn't do as well as a whole with literacy. Well, we're working with mom on how to read better, and we're working with the child on literacy skills on their age-appropriate level, right? So an example of story times, music times, and it could be that involve, everyone in the family, the child with a disability, siblings, or that kind of thing. Now, if you have child and caregiver, what a part-day child and caregiver often focuses on is the interaction between the child with a disability and the parent. And why would we do that? Why would we want to focus on increasing the mom's skills or the dad's skills? Okay, you got to think, they're with that child for a long time, more than, say, someone who works in early intervention. So it would be nice to teach that parent to work with the child so that when we're not there, then they can continue to work with the child. And so it's really nice. We focus on strengthening the skills of the parent while also working on the skills of the child in hopes that the parent can do it when we're not there. Some examples of this are floor time, watch, wait, and wonder. Okay, and what both of these kind of do. With floor time, it is more of a method that we use with kids with autism. And in floor time, they will take the child's lead. So whatever the child's interested in, they go with that child to wherever they want to play, and then they work on, talking and language skills and eye contact and all that kind of stuff. And so you're teaching the parent how to do that more effectively with the child. And I do have some interventions to show you. And again, I'm going to post a link to these in our classroom. One is a parent-child group, and the other one is a siblings-only group. And this will show you some different part-day child or parent-child intervention and sibling programs that are really neat to be able to look at and see, what are we going to do here? What does that look like? Now, there are also within who we teach in Birth to 3 children that are extremely medically fragile. Okay, I've had children that have had tracheas, who have had feeding tubes, who have had to be on oxygen, and those kind of, maybe they have seizures, or maybe they're very contagious. I had one that had colonized MRSA, which, is like a staph infection. She had it in her trach. It didn't bother her, but you could get it, like if you had an open wound, and we're working with her. And so these kids are really, really medically fragile, okay? And the parent may need to work, or they may need time away, or they may feel that this benefits their child to be in this kind of setting, in a daycare setting. And so often when you have a child that is this medically fragile, regular childcare is not going to work, because they often are nervous and scared about, what do we do? I don't know how to do a feeding tube. What do we do if they get hit and they have a feeding tube? What happens if the alarms go off and they have a trach? And, they get very nervous, and they don't often cater to children who have these kind of medical conditions. Or if they're contagious, they can't have them at the center. And so what happens at a medical childcare is that there's very, very specialized medical support, right? There is often nurses there, if not doctors. There are going to be PTs and OTs and speech, and they are going to be housed there, okay? And they provide a learning environment as much as possible. If the child is having seizures that day and can't take much interaction, then they're not going to give it. But for what the child can do, they're going to continue with things like physical therapy, with things like a developmental specialist coming in and working with the child, okay? And like I said, it then provides a place for them to rest or treatments if they need it. And so you can see how this would be very beneficial to a child that is extremely medically fragile to be able to get a center-based kind of option. And for the parents who might need to work, who might need a respite, who might feel that their children need to be out and working it. I will tell you that this option is more rare. We don't see it as often. You see it in bigger cities. Knoxville has a medical child care facility. Chattanooga, Siskins can be a medical child care facility. In the Tri-Cities, where we are, ETSU is located, I do not know of one. If anybody does, let me know, and I'll change that portion of this lecture, or at least write a note within the class so that people know there is one here. But in the smaller communities, this is not an option. And so often these children are kept in the home or are kept by a relative that is okay with keeping them. So you can see this is a rare treatment, but it is a good one if we can find them. So the medical care, daycare research, honestly, I couldn't find any. And so these are my thoughts on what are pros and cons. One, the parent's better at ease because they know the child's being taken care of. If I had a child that, say, had a trach and a feeding tube and they're going to a center, I would be very apprehensive at first until I knew that the center knew how to do the cleaning, the feeding, and all that kind of stuff, right? And so that's going to be kind of making me nervous until that I know that they can take care of my child. At a medical daycare, because it is nursing staff, I know that the child's being taken care of. Now, something else that is really nice, that the child receives prompt medical care when needed. So if that child is needing medical care that day, they're going to get it. And that's really nice as well, because they're, again, with nursing staff, and they're going to be able to see the signs, right? And say, oh, this child's starting to seizure, or to seize, we're going to need to put them on their side, we're going to need to do this, do that. Oh, let's do this. The colonized MRSA, we took a swab, it's on the outside today, we're going to really need to be careful with hand washing. There's things like that. Also, children do get to interact with others, and that should say others instead of ours, with others, and they do have learning times. So there's times where they are learning, they're not just laying there. I can tell you that I did work with a child that had it's the child that had colonized MRSA. She had cerebral palsy. She had various other issues and conditions wrong with her. And she liked to watch TV, and she liked to look left. And so what her parents did was they laid her on her side, and she looked left to watch TV. Now, think about what that's going to do to that child. Okay? When I started working with her, because she was so used to looking left, I could barely get her to look right at all. Okay. Also, children's heads are still growing and shaping, okay? And they're very malleable. If you're always looking left or laying left, what that's going to do is that's going to cause your head to shift, okay? And it's going to cause you to be dysmorphic. The face is going to kind of shift and be off and that kind of thing. In fact, sometimes you see very young children with helmets on. Sometimes they're trying to shape the head. I'll kind of give you an example. It's not a great example, but it's kind of an example how malleable kids' heads are. The reason kids' heads are this way, if when a child is born, the plates aren't fused together at the top of their head. And you can see, like with mine, you can see a heartbeat. His heart beating underneath the skin there. Why do we do that? Why does God? Why are we made that way? Right? Why does it happen? If you look, when a child is going through the birth canal is a smaller place. They got to squeeze their head through. Therefore, the head has to be more loosey-goosey, not as tight, right, so that it can go through. Okay? And then as the child ages, those fuse together. Well, I had a nephew that had a very hard labor. Basically, we kid him and say that he was lost in the birth canal, and he was kind of trying to come out on my sister's leg, and so he had to be kind of manipulated to come over and be birthed and stuff. But because he was in the birth canal so long, his head was a pretty bad cone, right? You heard of cone heads, but his was a sideways cone head because of how he was in the birth canal. And so my sister, who was a nurse, she would sit and hold him, and she would rub his head, right? Rub it And then she would also make sure that he laid on every side. She would lay him on his left side for a while, his right side for a while, back a while, front a while. She would do all these things, and he has a fine head now, and that evened out really, really early on. So that kind of shows you how malleable a child's head can be. And so you can see where if you have a parent that isn't knowledgeable about what could happen whenever they do these things, they thought, oh, it's great because she likes to look left, let's just put the TV on that side. What I encouraged them to do when I started working with her was, if she likes to look left, let's put the TV on the right, to encourage her to, one, stretch the muscles, and also to maybe get her head to be more even and look more correct, okay? Now, another thing about a medical daycare that is a con is that it can be often very expensive. Sometimes your medical insurance will cover it, sometimes they won't. And so sometimes the option is not there for people simply because they don't have the finances to be able to afford this. Another thing that is a con is that it's not inclusive. In a medical daycare, they often do not have inclusion or peers. One, because bringing germs in, medically fragile kids that are contagious, giving it to the typical children. You can see how it is a very difficult process. So therefore, you can see how they often are not inclusive at all. And also, it is hard to find. As I said, Knoxville, Tennessee is the one that I know of that's the closest to Johnson City. And another thing is they're really small. In Knoxville, of course, this has been a few years, and now maybe they are bigger. But whenever I was working there were only maybe 8 to 10 beds. Knoxville's a decently big area. You know that there are probably more than 8 to 10 families that could use or benefit from a medical daycare, and yet only 8 to 10 kids were in there because that was all the slots they have. So you can see how it can be hard to find a medical daycare. And I have a great video of a medical daycare, and as you can see, this little girl has a feeding tube, and yet she's playing with her baby and that kind of thing. But I've got a really neat video about a medical childcare. It is in Boston, if I remember correctly. So it's quite a ways away. Of course, it's in a really big city, and it's really, really neat, but it kind of shows you what can happen and what a medical daycare or childcare can look like. Now, the other thing that we have is community or home-based early intervention. This is kind of the gold standard for early intervention right now. And again, it started out as home-based because we used to see children in the home only. Okay. Now, as families started working and children are now in daycares, that kind of thing, it has changed to community-based. Okay, we say that more now because the child may not actually be at home. Maybe they're being kept by an aunt or an uncle. Maybe they're in daycare. Maybe the parents want them in an inclusive daycare setting while they work. Then that way we can bring the intervention to them. So below you see a list of places where you might have home-based or community-based early intervention. Parks and playgrounds are great. You got a child that has to work on gross motor skills and they are near a park, then having that there is a great place to do it. Pools, sometimes very kind of therapeutic to be in the water. And again, other people's homes or child care facilities. Think about how great that is. If you have a child that has, that is say, 2, and they have a speech issue, they're not talking like they should be, then they're in a regular daycare. They're hearing all this 2-year-old speech around them the whole entire time, and they're getting all kinds of stuff. And what's neat about that, the person that's a developmental specialist or the special education teacher can educate that daycare worker on how to work with that child, how to include them more in activities. And that daycare worker then has that knowledge maybe to help another child, right, that may have just a slight issue with some of the different ways of communicating, right? So maybe they're only a little bit behind, but they're not behind enough to be considered delayed and receive services. Then that child care worker can help that child. And so you can see, or they can identify and say, hey, this child is a lot like this other child that I've had. I'm going to see if I can refer for services. So you're educating the community, and that's kind of a neat thing. Okay, now community-based research. Here's the pros and cons of community-based research. First of all, the child is in a familiar setting. That is really, really important because we know that we learn skills best in the setting in which we're going to use them. Think about driving a car. If I could put you in a simulator all day long, okay, can let you play with the simulator, we can simulate doing that. When you get in a real car, is it going to be slightly different? It is, isn't it? So even though we can set up in a center various skills and things we want the child to do, it's very, very different than when they're actually doing it and out on the road. Now, what else is neat is that the parents learn to use whatever they have. So we kind of talked about this in the last lecture, but what's neat about going into the home is that if say I normally have a piece of PVC pipe or a wedge or something. I'm a physical therapist and I'm trying to get that child in a crawl position, and I normally stick something like that under their tummy to work on this skill. If I'm in that child's home, I may say to the mom, can I borrow some of your towels to roll up so that we can stick them under the child, and show her how to do that. Then when I'm gone, that mom can say, oh, I'm going to do this like she did in therapy to try to get her to get in crawl position to strengthen her skills. So you can see why it's really neat to use what's in the home. Now, and again, skills are learned in the environment. They are most likely to be performed. So therefore, if they're in their home and we're wanting them to learn to walk, learning to walk in their home is really, really nice. Also, it has a positive effect on child and caregiver interaction. What we see is when we have it in the home, there is more interaction. The parents aren't as maybe afraid to do whatever, to do some of these developmental skills, to work on them, because they see the therapist doing it and they're like, oh, I can do that. And it also helps in parent-caregiver involvement. If we have a center-based program and the child goes to the center, often the parent's not included. I talked about 3-4 models there, and out of that, only the parents were included in one, right? And so we often have within center-based programs the parent or the family not included and they're not involved. And so they pick up their child and they know that the therapy's been worked on. They may or may not work on it as much at home. When we have community-based, that parent or the caregiver is seeing what's going on, they're involved in the process, and then hopefully they're carrying it on so that instead of getting services for an hour a week, the child is really getting services maybe for 10 hours a week or whatever while they work on skills. Now, a con of community-based is that it may not impact development as much as a more intense program. And so you can see how maybe if the parent isn't as involved, maybe if their life is just really, really hectic and they don't have time to work on things, they're saying that the research is showing that we actually see more, right? More skills developed in a center. Also, and I kind of mentioned this as a pro, visits can only last an hour, so it has little impact if the caregiver is not working with them. So my going in for an hour a week is not going to benefit that child that much if there's not someone there that is following up, okay? And then if you do have a child in a daycare setting, the best practice is to make sure that the daycare knows what's going on, the parent knows what's going on, and sometimes that's hard to do for the person that's working, okay? In Tennessee, for example, if the child has written into their IFSP that they get 1 hour of services a week, then if I go to the daycare, then I can't go to the moms too because I'm not going to get paid for that, right? And so that's kind of a minus. I have had where I went to the mom 1 week at night, the next week I went to the daycare to work with the kid and the daycare worker. I've also had where there were custody issues where I would go with the mom on Tuesday nights, then the next week on Wednesday night I would go to the dads, and that way it involved both parents. And we see more and more issues like this, and it's harder to do that because one person is not getting all of the information, right? So you can see it can be a slower process. So we have to make sure that that they're going over with both. You have to make sure that you can do that as the early interventionist. And there's just a lot of logistic issues that work out whenever we are in the community-based. So there are different models of community-based early intervention, okay? And there's a lot of not only are there different models, there are different philosophies about how to do early intervention. That's going to be in later lectures, but right now we're going to talk about the different models, okay? So there's agency-based and there's individual contractor, and there may be other different models, and it may be combined in different states. Okay, with agency-based early intervention, what happens here is that the state contracts with an agency to provide early intervention. Okay, now here we have you have some evidence of this with like ARC of Washington County, which that is something that has an agency providing the services, okay? The agency hires the professionals to work with the families. So say if you work for ARC, for instance, you're an employee of ARC, and they're the ones that say if they need an OT or they need a developmental specialist or an early interventionist, right? They are the ones that hire those people, and those people actually are employed by that agency, and they provide services to children. We have that in Tennessee. However, and here's some pros and cons. We also have the others, is what I was going to say. Here's some pros and cons on agency-based. The pro is that the agency finds the practitioners. Okay, so what is neat about that is, say we don't have a physical therapist here in Washington County, Tennessee, then ARC can go out and find a physical therapist. Okay, and that's really, really nice. If someone's sick, they might be able to have a substitute. So what's good about that is I have an early interventionist that normally goes and sees the certain families every week. That person has the flu. Well, maybe we have another early interventionist that can pick up some of those visits. Okay. Another great thing is that professionals can have benefits. They can have sick leave. They can have vacation time. There can be an insurance. So you can see how this can be very beneficial, the things that they can do. Now, the cons are it is much more expensive for the state to contract with an agency than to contract one-on-one individual. Okay, and the practitioner may not make as much because the agency is going to get their cut, right? The agency has to get their cut for providing the insurance and the sick leave and that. So the agency may get, and this is just a rough example, the agency may get $50 per visit per child, and yet the practitioner only gets $40 of the $50. Because the agency's having to cover cost of sick leave, vacation, other employees that work for the agency that aren't doing home visits. So you can see how that can kind of be a con for early intervention. Now, contractor-based early intervention, this is what we're seeing a lot across the states, okay? And it is where the different professionals contract with the state to provide the services in a given area. What that means, when I did early intervention, when I first started, I worked with Home Partnerships Early Intervention Program, and then later on I worked with Tennessee Infants and Parents, TIPS, and these are no longer in existence in Tennessee. And then after that, I contracted with the state. And what that means is I basically have a contract with the state, and the state gives me money to go do the visits. And we're going to talk about the pros and cons of this one. The pros are it's cheaper for the state. They can employ more early interventionists, which is awesome. Yay! Okay, more people can get employed. And practitioners might get more money individually since there's no managing agency. So you might actually get more money individually. And that's really cool too, because I'm getting all the money, I'm doing the work. Yay! Now, the cons are there's no benefits. Because I'm contracting with the state, they see me as an independent contractor. Nobody gives me sick days, vacation, retirement, any of that. None of that's going on. All right. Now, sometimes states do not pay mileage. And if they don't pay mileage, then there's an issue often with practitioners. They choose to serve the children that are closer to them instead of seeing kids that are farther away. So often kids in the really, really rural areas don't get the services because nobody wants to drive out there. So an example is this. In West Virginia, they had a flat rate. It was like $55 to see a child. Okay, for an hour visit, but that includes your mileage to and from that child. So again, what we were saying is if you lived in a town, then you often would see kids that lived in the town, but say you had to drive 30 minutes to see another child with gas as expensive as it is, the further you have to drive, the less money you actually get because you're having to shell out gas. So you could see why in West Virginia there was not that kind of wanting to go out into more rural areas. Now in Tennessee, they did pay mileage. I'm assuming they still do. They did when I worked there. So I got $35 a visit per child, but I got mileage to and from. So if I was driving an hour, I may get $14 in gas money to go there. So you can see where in the end I was making as much, if not more, than a practitioner in West Virginia because I was getting the mileage to and from. Another thing that can be a nightmare is that you have to pay your own taxes. Often when you're a contractor with the state, they don't take out any taxes or anything. They just give you the money, okay? And this can be a problem because if you don't keep out a little and pay them quarterly or try to estimate and hold that out, then you think, oh, I'm getting $50 here, there, yon, when you're actually only getting, say, 40 because 10% or whatever has to go to the government, has to do that. And it can be really, really challenging. I know that one time when I did this, I thought, well, my husband's job will cover our taxes, and it didn't. And we were going to owe the state something like $2,000 or $3,000. We looked and were able to get it to where we didn't owe them quite that much. But you can see how it can be very costly, and you have to be very careful if you're doing your own taxes. Also, under a contractor-based early intervention, it is really hard to be a full-time practitioner. I can tell you that whenever I did it, the 1 year that I attempted to be a contractor and do early intervention only, because I've at times worked in a preschool or worked K through 5 severe disabilities while I also did early intervention on the side. The times that I did that, I didn't get but like $25,000 or something that year, and as a teacher, I could get $10,000 to $15,000 more a year. So you can see how it's often very hard for them to be a full-time practitioner. This can also be difficult because then you've got a lot of part-time people that are trying to coordinate. Okay, so say we're wanting to have an IFSP meeting. This person is a part-time employee and they work in a school system, so they only do nights. This person is a part-time employee and they have no children, and so they prefer to do only daytime visits. You can see where getting together for a meeting or communication can kind of break down, and that can kind of be a con as well. In Tennessee, we currently kind of have both going on. We have where you can be a contractor totally with the state, but we also have agencies like ARC and that kind of thing. So you can see how kind of both are going on. Now, there's different types of teaming, okay? And teaming means how we interact and how we work together as professionals, okay? So early interventionists have different ways to provide service to families, and here are the different models, okay? And we're going to talk about the different models. There's interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary, coaching, and primary service provider model. So let's go over all these different models and talk a little bit more about each one. Whoa! I know that this is probably kind of overwhelming, this chart, but I wanted you to kind of be able to see everything all at once and compare and contrast, okay? And so let's go, from left to right across the top. Let's talk about the multidisciplinary, okay? With the multidisciplinary, the disciplines work in their own disciplines with the family. There's no cohesion, there's no overlap, okay? And the idea is we all have our specialties and we're going to work in our specialties because that's what we do. So, for example, I'm the speech therapist and all I do is work on speech goals. I don't care what the occupational therapist is doing. I don't care what the developmental specialist is doing. I have this very narrow set of goals and they are mine and I'm working on them. When it's time to assess, I am going to conduct the assessment, okay? Now, who provides the direct services? All disciplines work on their goals. So that means if you have a child that has a significant disability, then you could easily have a developmental specialist or an early interventionist that comes in and works on skills and goals once a month. You could have a physical therapist that comes and works on skills and goals once a week or once a month, however we set it up, right? We'll say once a week. Let's look at weekly. You could have an occupational therapist that comes in and works on fine motor skills once a week. You can have a speech language pathologist that comes in and works on skills once a week. You could have a parent educator that comes and work on skills. You could have nursing staff that comes in. Can you see how many professionals? We're up to 6 now, right? And there could even be more. Say they have problems with hearing or problems with vision, then you might have a mobility coach or a vision person come. So you can see how many people could be coming to those people's homes once a week. That's a lot of people, isn't it? Also, the members are responsible for their own goals. So I'm responsible for my goals. The occupational therapist is responsible for their goals. So that's what a multidisciplinary team works like. Now, in an interdisciplinary team, we come up with a very cohesive plan. This is our plan and how we're going to work it. We all have our schedule or our own specialties and what we can do, but we have very cohesive plan on how we're going to work with this child. Okay, so in the first one, it's kind of no cohesion. So you have each person saying, this is what's best for this child in this area. Okay, interdisciplinary, we're going to look at the whole child, and we're going to say, this is what's best for the child. Okay, but still we're working separately. The professionals conduct their own assessments still in this as well, and all disciplines work on their own goals after those goals have been agreed upon by the whole team. In multidisciplinary, the speech pathologist could say, I want these goals, and everybody else go, I don't know, and they go, yeah, this is the goals I want, and this is how we're going to provide it. In interdisciplinary, I want to do these goals. And the rest of the team may say, why? I don't understand why you want to do those goals. And there's talking about it. And then the occupational therapist says, well, I know you want to talk about cows and that kind of thing, but they don't have the fine motor ability to do this with them. Why don't we wait on that goal? And so what happens is there's more give and take, and the professionals work together. They agree upon the goals. However, when it comes time to being responsible for the disability or the IFSP, all members still do the services. So you still have 4, 5, 6, maybe 7 people coming into the home once a week. Okay? Now, in transdisciplinary, we have role release, and this is where the disciplines work together. Different professions work on the different goals. And what this might mean is, say there's a feeding goal. Well, we know that feeding involves oral motor, which is a field for speech language pathology. Eating also involves occupational therapy. Okay, so therefore we may have both of those people working on this goal. Okay, also it could be that maybe I'm the developmental specialist and I am working on color identification. Well, not only am I working on him to point to it, the child to point to it, I am working with the speech language pathologist to create things where they have to say it, right, where we're getting verbalizations. So we all have our own disciplines, but we work on each other's goals. Okay, now the teams in the family conduct a joint assessment, and it's one assessment time only, and everybody attends. This is often called an arena assessment. What happens is it might be that we go to a center to have the assessment, and the person that they feel has the best rapport with the child goes and works with the child, and everybody else sits around and does the assessment. And it might mean that they say, see if they can catch a ball. Somebody might say that. And so the person working with the child does that kind of interaction. So you can see how we're all looking like an arena, like a football arena. We're all looking at what's going on with the kid and with the person that is, working with them, and someone else is doing actually the assessment. Okay? And so, and again, who provides the service? All disciplines works on any goal, no matter the discipline. And who's responsible for the IEP? We're all responsible for it jointly, meaning not only is the occupational therapist responsible for his goals, so is the speech language pathologist, so is the early interventionist. Okay, so you can see how this can work together. I will tell you that sometimes professionals have a hard time in a transdisciplinary type setting. Why would that be? Can you think about that? Why would that be hard? It's the role release, right? You can see where that can be an issue. It would be very, very hard, say, if I'm an occupational therapist, to give up and say, not give up as in, I give up, but to say, okay, you have the ability to work with that child in occupational goals. Because sometimes therapists think, I went to school for X amount of years. I am trained in this. This is my specialty. I cannot allow you to do that specialty. Okay, so you can see where some professionals can have a hard time with role release. I want to do my role, that is my role. Okay, and in a transdisciplinary model, we're not doing that. We're saying, okay, we're going to all work on these, and it might mean that I work with that OT to say, okay, how do I work on this skill? I don't have the knowledge, help me. And they help train me and help train the parents, and we may not be as good or as knowledgeable as the OT, and the OT still comes, so it's not like they don't come. But I'm working on that skill too, and then they do too. The neat thing about transdisciplinary is you have more people working on the same skills, okay? So the child is getting more interaction with these skills, and things are going really well, right? So you could see where they might increase skill level more quickly because they have more professionals working on the same skills and goals. Now, primary service provider is relatively new term and idea. You see it in Kentucky and you see it in Georgia. So you do see the primary service provider model going around. And this is what happens with that model, okay? All discipline assess the child. So there's still a team around the child. However, only one professional goes into the home to work on the goals. Now remember, on multi, interdisciplinary, and transdisciplinary, you could have as many members as you need. You need occupational therapist comes. You need a physical therapist comes. Okay? In primary service provider model, it's kind of what it sounds like. There is one primary person providing the service. Okay? Now, why do we do this? Okay, the philosophy behind this one is research shows that more is not always better. Okay, when looking at children under one of the other models and a primary service provider model, often we are seeing kids benefit as much or more just by having one person come into the home. And you got to think about that too. That means there's just less disruption to the family. If you have a significantly involved, a child that has significant disabilities and are significantly involved, you can imagine if you have 5 or 6 people coming for an hour each week, and that you're having to schedule that, and they can't all come on the same day, or they come on the same day and the child is very tired, or they can't come on the same day and you have to stay at home, or you have to rush to get back home because you have a therapist or a early interventionist coming. So you can see how that can be very troublesome sometimes. Sometimes it's better for the family to have that one person that they bond to. Now this can be a good thing and it can be a bad thing. You have one person, one personality that you're working with primarily. Great. The bad part of that can be when the primary service provider is making you more dependent on them. Right? And I'll give you an example kind of this. And this wasn't primary service, but we often mean well, right? People don't go into early intervention without meaning well because you don't make tons of money at it. You know, you're not going to get rich at it. And so you want to help those families. You want to help this child learn skills and to progress. And so what happens sometimes, and this happened in a case of a colleague of mine, you get very, very involved with the family. Okay. The colleague that I worked with had, well, not the colleague, but the child that she worked with had, spinal muscular atrophy. And what that means is the muscles in the spinal column were atrophying. They were getting more and more weak, right? Because that's what atrophy is. The muscle gets smaller. It's not as useful. And so what that meant was most kids that have this die before their first birthday. It's a very debilitating thing. And so the developmental specialist, it was in rural Tennessee, got very involved with this family and her community, helped start fund drives because they were very poor and they were worried about how they were going to bury their child, started fundraising campaigns and things like that for burial costs for the family, got to where she was going over almost every day, would take by meals for the family, would do various things, very kind-hearted, very genuine. What happened, however, was that when the child died, they called the service provider, right, the early interventionist, rather than calling 911 or when the child became in distress. And so you can see what happened was in her want to help, she made the family very dependent on her. Okay, and so that is something that we have to really be cautious about when we do primary service provider. Okay. They have, when they do an assessment, we want the fewest number of people needed to do the assessment, and the assessment often occurs at one time. Who provides the direct service? The family chooses one professional to work on all goals. Okay? And what happens are members are jointly responsible for all the goals that are implemented. So what happens is you still have a team of professionals doing the assessment, coming to an IFSP meeting and say, here are the goals we need worked on. However, only one of those people is chosen by the family to implement all the goals. It could be that they say, speech is our major concern, therefore we want the speech language pathologist to come in. And so the speech language pathologist works on the speech goals, but they also do PT and OT. Okay, it could be that we want the developmental specialist or the early interventionist because they know the most in general about all disciplines, so that's the person that we pick. Okay. Now, what is often tricky in these kinds of models is that, remember how we talked about a lot of states still do where they contract with one individual? Well, you often have that in primary service provider. But you got to think about this. If that child is only getting one professional, there's other professionals over here that are not getting to come and see this child, which means they are not getting any money or not getting as much money. Under the primary service provider model, what happens is that one individual gets the money for the visits, and there's a reduced rate when the members are together, and the members all have to be together when they are working on goals or skills. So what happens is this. Say I get, and this is a real rough, low figure, say I get $30 an hour to go visit a child. If I'm part of a primary service provider team, but I'm not the primary service provider, the primary service provider gets the $30, I get, say, $15 an hour when we come together and work. So you can see how that is very much cheaper for the state, but that the individual provider is not getting as much, right? So you can see where there's turf wars and there's all kinds of issues with it. So we see all of these models in different states. It depends on what state you go to as to what model is being used. Here in, and it could be sometimes we think we're doing one model, like a transdisciplinary, where we're all involved and all working on goals, but it might only be interdisciplinary, right, or multidisciplinary. So you can see how we sometimes might think we're doing one kind of thing, but we're not working together as cohesively, so therefore we're doing another. But these are very, very common models that we see in early intervention now. Okay? Now, again, a word about primary service provider model. It is the in model. It is becoming the thing to do. Okay? So I'm not surprised, or I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing it in other states. It's very much cheaper for the state. The state doesn't pay for all the visits from the different disciplines. And then often disciplines are concerned that the other disciplines cannot incorporate their goals. Okay, so a standing frame is a device that helps the child to stand, because even if you don't have the ability to stand, your muscles and your bones need to be in standing position. And so you can see how the physical therapist might be very concerned about how another therapist is going to use that. Are they going to use that like they should when they do home visits and that kind of thing? So it is something that I've not really made up my mind about. It's really interesting to me that research is showing that more is not always better. But that also means that it is showing that in some cases it is better. So, just things to think about. You never know. Things swing in states. Ideas pop up. They try one way, then they try another. So you never know where things are going. But right now, primary service provider model, PSP, is the way to go in a lot of states. And so here are some links about transdisciplinary and PSP. I will have those links in the class so that you can look at these. And when I have you link to a video or look at a video, often it is 10 minutes or under, but it really highlights what we're talking about in our learning modules and in our class about different models or about whatever information that I give you. So that is the end of our lecture for today, and I thank you for coming, and I will see you in the next module.